Good hello, welcome to Onionskin, and welcome back to the over-engineered nightmare that was Magnemite. Now getting its compositing treatment that you may have seen recently. Very bland colors to start. Let's make it a little bit flashier. So what he needs is some automatically generated shadow. So I'm adding in some apply peg transformations to the left magnet here, shifting it to the right, giving it a cutter so it only appears within the head, and then a matte blur, which is just a quick and dirty way to change something's color in its entirety. I'm having a similar system that's sharing the same peg where it's all just shifted to the right with another matte blur and another cutter to try and get the same effect going on the head going down the left hand side. But you can see here the effect isn't quite working. It was inverted wrong. It took a little bit of fiddling, but there we go. It's now cutting out to the left just fine. Trying to keep things tidy as it's already getting a little bit complicated with lots of strings going everywhere because I want to now get that same look pushed from the head over onto the right hand side magnet, and because I already have the main ball area shifted, I can use that same apply peg transformation from before but just with a different cutter once you get another matte output. I'm thinking maybe I can share the matte outputs for the left hand side because they're sort of like layered together. But in order to get the line art playing well as some of these elements start to interact, I'm having to split the sub layers of some of them because this was originally meant to be a quick and dirty build. I was a bit naughty and I didn't split things into their sub layers as I went. I just sort of kept it all flat. Now I'm doing the right thing only where I need to, not all the way across, only as I need to do it, where, you know, you cut out the fills, you move down to the color up sublayer, and you paste them in. You also saw the magnets flash pink just for a moment there. That was giving them their own gray, making an independent gray swatch, so that they can be their own gray. I can do separate things with them to the head now if I want. Because now I want to make a shine. You can see a separate layer is being made here that's just invisible strokes with just roughly drawn streaks all the way through it. Some of them colored in white, other ones colored in a dark gray. This is just going to be my shine matte. Fun little trick for making things shiny is to have the shine itself actually be stationary, and then the character or object or whatever it is moving around underneath makes it look more reflective once it all gets masked in properly. So I'm building some contraptions now that will separate just the front grays and the front red and the front blue to be interacting in with those masks, leaving the darker tints behind that using a color selector node. So you can see now there that magnet on the right where those shines are being masked in and where they're not. How it's sort of coming out over the front of the magnet, so they all need to be sort of brought together in a composite, laid together as one unit and put in behind. Now, one of the big advantages of sort of separating the splits like this is I tend to get carried away and, like, you know, let's give it some glows and some color correction and some flair. So shortly we'll be moving into groups to try and figure out how to do that. What am I doing right now? This is all being recorded in post rather than doing it live like I normally do. I was so exhausted after doing this Magnemite that I just sort of just needed to knuckle down and concentrate, get my zest back. I was feeling a bit raw after that first one. So what's happening next? Oh yes, testing out different ways that these lights can be interacting. Should I use a blending mode? Should it be like an overlay or a multiply or something like that? It doesn't seem to be playing with the different colors as well as I would have liked, so I think I end up opting just for like some transparencies and some glows, but I muck around with a few different options because Harmony recently got like curves and levels and things added, so that was sort of interesting to muck around with. So now we're inside the group. This is where things get like insane. So I've got two color selectors. One of them pulls out the middle gray and one pulls out the red and the blue. And I'm really experimenting with how can I get the shines to not just glow on the whites but not glow on the darks, but particularly that the lights can behave a little bit differently when they're interacting with a blue or a red rather than a gray, so the glow will have a little bit of color to it. Always in hindsight, this stuff feels like it should be a lot easier, and there probably are easier ways, and in these personal experiments where I'm not working for a client and I don't have to give it to any animators, I don't really need to care so much about the art of efficiency, because, you know, normally in production you want to try and keep things fairly light on the CPU if you can. You don't want animators using stuff where, you know, every click is going to take 5 seconds to register. So like going this heavy on cutters and glows and all this, it's too much. It really is. But it makes for a good story of production, I suppose. If anything, that's like the catch-22 of that, you know, walking drumstick thing from last week. Really simple and easy to do, easy to follow along with. Its story of creation isn't quite so interesting though, because, you know, it's just, I did a drawing, it moves now. But, you know, like the journey of like trial and error and just consistent failing that happens with this stuff, where Magnemite has gone from one of my most loved to most hated. I never want to see him again. I still want to kind of draw another one. Do another one as simply as possible, just to prove that this isn't whatever. So putting some glows on it now. I'm messing around with different ways that can be done. Personally, I often like to do 2 layers of glow, sort of, where one is like washed out and then another one has like a radius of 0 or simply no glow at all. So when they're stacked, they sort of like play well together. So particularly here, this little strip that's interacting with the color, there's this hard question of like how much color or how much brightness do you want to bring through in that core bit. You know, do you want it to be like a lightsaber where the middle of it is just pure white and only the like offshoot is the color itself? Personally, I quite like it where there is some color in the core, but yeah, I'm sort of on the fence here. It seems like it's going to be easier to leave it mostly white. Oh, do I get yeah, it looks like I get a bit of a compromise. I've forgotten already. It was yesterday. It's difficult to remember yesterday. I think I had separate color selectors again to separate the shines and the shadows. That's also, again, a very unconventional method. It's good practice to not use color selectors and things to split out layers into different ways. You should at the very least just be using the sub layers or just different layers entirely. This is sort of the result of trying to work fast, because it's like, oh, I'll just throw everything onto one layer. Oh, actually, I need all these things to be doing different stuff, so I need to now split them in post. And when you think about it, if you plan things properly, it's probably quicker to just make those different layers from the start. Then you don't have to worry about going in and splitting them to give them different behaviors. Where are we now? The head, it just got a bit of a gradient, just simple gradient, nothing fancy there. I think I am also playing with, like, should the eyeball have color to it, but I end up leaving it white. Oh, I know, I ended up getting conflicted with the car shadow of the ball itself being on the left, because, you know, like the gradient itself is sort of coming in from the left, and the shadows from the magnets, they're sort of bouncing off onto the right. So should the shadow on the actual ball itself be on the right? Regardless of whether or not it's correct, I ended up preferring it on the left. Leave me alone. But overall, I'm pretty rubbish with color. It's still just grey, isn't it? Grey is boring. It needs to have some sort of tint. How do I give it a tint? Oh, I know. Let's just have a color card over the top, cut out everything from it, and then give it an overlay blending mode. And now it just has this, like, you know, cool, deep, rich blueness to it. Yeah. The color card is brought from its default of 12 spaces back to being 0. That way it can be used as a matte. I'm sure I've covered that in a few videos by now. I don't remember what all this is. I think it ended up being another failed experiment of trying to get the colors to do. Oh no, the line art was starting to get weird. See how, like, the glows are going, the line art was going over the glows, like completely over the glows, and that wasn't okay. So then it was like trying to rewire everything, and the shapes of the shines, they went completely over the line. So it had to be this compromise where the lines are over the, like you see it on that red there, where the lines go over the shapes, but they don't go over the radiance of the glows. That's what that is. So that ended up working out all right in the end, which is, you know, one of those compromises. I'm definitely putting off doing the bolts. They suck. Fortunately, they didn't end up being quite as intense as the front shines. I really over-engineered that. Because the thing I'm cautious about with the bolts is like they're 3 of the same thing, right? Like all of their layering and like rigging methods was duplicated, and only the head of the bolt was redrawn. The rest of it was duplicated and shifted around. You know, like that cross section is still just flat. I never got round to cleaning up its mesh warp to get it really smooth around. I just couldn't be bothered. But that cross section does get apply peg transformation a bit to the left and then masked in so that it can have a bit of an automatic drop shadow on the inside. I always think that method's kind of cool because like it's automatically updating as that rotates. You know, it's just a clean rotation on the middle of that cross, but with the other effects manipulating it around, you know, it's going to be dropping the shadow inside there, and I always think that's kind of cool. So I do the same thing for the head of the bolt onto the main shaft of it. That probably could just be drawn in there raw. No reason why you couldn't, but like I'm neck deep in this now where I'm just like, no, everything is automatically generated, so it's gonna be automatically generated. And even that, I know not everything is automatically generated because like the actual rotation itself, that is being done with a tween rather than like you could get the quake or the shake to do that. If you tell it to animate like its number generation to only be on the rotation, that would work. And now sort of looking back, I feel like I should have done it that way just as a matter of principle. I was so over it by this point. It's like, no, I don't care. I'm just animating it by hand. It's interesting, isn't it? How often trying to get technology to do something for you is more work than just doing it manually. And that's probably why we are animators, right? Like we prefer that personal touch. You know, all this stuff, it's like, well, why aren't we doing 3D? Because we like to draw. We like that manual process, and then I go and spoil it with this junk. I hope it's somewhat interesting. This is probably why I like making videos of it though, because like in the final result, it's just like you can't tell, you know, like it might as well just which is probably why I'm like, oh, why didn't I just draw it? But at least now I can show it off. Look at all the stuff going on back here. You don't get to see it in any other way. This is the only way. But now I'm going through the very laborious and annoying process of bringing the compositing manipulations that I did to that first bolt to the other ones, which means rewiring everything in a very specific way that I don't break it. The only solution I really know of is by making a copy of the whole structure, bringing it into the other ones, and then sort of just rewiring it by eye, making sure that everything is plugged into it correctly, which is kind of silly. And I wish there was a way of turning groups into like a symbol, or you know, like a function in scripting, where whatever you change inside one group will automatically update all of the nodes inside its copies. It seems really weird that isn't a thing, right? Because there's pretty much Harmony's whole thing. Everything with Harmony is like is in its parenting nature. Like the whole frame and drawing substitution thing is like, hey, you don't need symbols anymore because that's just how the program works. You make clones of pegs and it will copy each other. It's brilliant. It's how we do everything, but it doesn't work with making these huge groups. It's very exhausting when you have to update 30 pieces, okay? I only have to do it 3 times here. Thank goodness we're not real life engineers, huh? Where you have to perform manual operations on, you know, like building 30 of the same part. You just have to build them. You just have to build them. Anyway, this last bit is thinking if should I have shades on the eye, and I say no. The classic cartoon rule of having eyes glow in the dark. Hooray. Alright, there we go. The compositing is done. What a fun ramble. This is going to be interesting to listen back to. Did you follow along with any of that? I didn't. Thanks for joining me. Bye. Oh yes, the working files for these, of course, available to Patreons, as they are always. Thank you very much for your support. That is the thing that allows stupid videos like this to keep happening. I'm glad you enjoy them.